Hello and good day, everyone. Thank you for joining today's webinar. We'll be taking a look at the next normal in education. My name is Darren Sabo, and I'll be leading our session along with my colleague, Will Barkus, who will be helping us vet audience questions for our Fireside Chat later on. Before we get started, let me provide you with a little bit of background. Today's session is part of a 20-webinar series called Business Resilience in All Times. The Orange is organizing to provide information and thought leadership to support business leaders throughout the COVID-19 pandemic and beyond. Today's session is a look into the domain of education in the next normal. Our goal is to provide a Silicon Valley perspective on the major societal changes we expect to see in the digitally accelerated world after the pandemic. And just a little background on Orange Silicon Valley. Our office has been a part of the Silicon Valley ecosystem for about 20 years now. We engage with the local ecosystem through our involvement in investments, strategy, and technology innovation. We have a team of 45 subject matter experts focusing on 17 areas of innovation, including smart cities, connected cars, artificial intelligence, digital health, and many more. As for myself, I'm a principal here at Orange Silicon Valley focusing on emerging markets, and in particular, how we can leverage programs and partnerships to build a bridge between the Silicon Valley ecosystem and Africa and the Middle East. Now, this touches a variety of industries, including rural connectivity, health, agriculture, financial services, and education, which brings us here today. We're thrilled to be joined by two excellent guest speakers. First, we have Raghu Krishnaiah, who is Chief Operating Officer at University of Phoenix, which is an institution that was really a pathfinder in terms of providing higher education online. It boasts over 1 million alumni around the world since its founding in 1976. And we're also joined by Stacy Wang, who's currently the CEO of the San Francisco Education Fund, a local organization that channels necessary resources into primary and secondary schools to improve student success across the San Francisco Unified School District. We look forward to hearing from them a little later. The general structure of today's webinar is pretty simple. We're just concluding with a 5-minute introduction. Then we'll go into about a 15-minute state of the education industry presentation. And finally, we'll go into a Fireside Chat for the final 25 minutes with our guests, and where we'll be introducing audience questions. So please enter any questions that you might have in the chat or question box on your screen. And my colleague, Will Barkus, is going to be collecting them throughout the session for use during the Fireside Chat session later on. So why don't we get started? Education is effectively the gateway to the economy. Now, what I mean by that is without reopening the educational system, we'll be holding back our chances of really returning to economic stability and growth. In a paper published back in 2015, a renowned economist named Luger Wassman found that student outcomes explain some 75% of recent economic development. This is empirical evidence showing how education and economics are closely intertwined. Now, as a result of the pandemic, the most obvious example of this interaction is in the preschool and K-12 sector of the educational system, where many parents will find it hard to return to the workplace if they don't have somewhere for their children to go throughout the day. Hence the designation here of an indirect economic impact. However, for college students, those waiting to graduate, or those already in the workforce, a delay in the school year could mean a delay in finding that first job or building skills necessary to meet the rapidly changing demands of the labor market. Hence, this could have a direct effect on employability and the broader economy in the longer term. This also applies to upskilling workforce development. The world's changing at a very fast pace right now, and if we can't upskill or reskill employees to meet the new demands, it can be very challenging to keep up with the next normal. So exactly how big is the education market? Well, as always, the exact numbers depend on who you ask, but some estimates put spending on education currently around $6 trillion globally, growing to $10 trillion by the end of the decade. We'll have to wait to see how these numbers are affected by the COVID-19 pandemic, but even still, if the education industry were a country, it would have the 3rd largest GDP, right between China and Japan. Not only has the COVID-19 pandemic had a huge impact on the education industry, but it happened incredibly fast. Here in the US, within 1 week alone, initial school closings affected nearly the entire 55 million K through 12 public school students. Then a little over a month later, many of those same students and families were told that there would be an early end to the academic year. This is an extremely short period of time to prepare and adapt to this new reality. Then if you look at global figures, the numbers are just catastrophic. UNESCO reports that across 138 countries, there are 1.37 billion students out of school. That's about 80% of total school-age children around the world. This number is fluctuating, obviously, as countries close and reopen their schools. It's been as high as 1.6 billion students. And in terms of teachers, they're estimating about 60.2 million teachers out of the classroom. We've probably all heard the most about video conferencing solutions such as Zoom, WebEx, Microsoft Teams, and video content platforms such as YouTube that educators quickly turned to try to substitute virtual learning for in-person learning. But even this was a huge challenge because many teachers, students, and parents alike weren't fully versed in using these technology platforms. But video solutions are just one aspect of digital learning. When we talk about digital learning, we're talking about a whole gamut of tools and systems that facilitate the educational system. These tools can really enhance the learning experience, not just create a simple substitution for in-person learning. This consists of everything from e-textbooks and mobile learning to MOOCs, which are massive online open courses, and gamified approaches, to more advanced techniques utilizing AI to personalize learning and create an experience that really adapts to the learner's needs. Now, I'm not suggesting that digital learning will completely replace in-person instruction. I don't think that's completely practical, but we'll likely see a transition of some sort of blend following the COVID-19 pandemic based on local needs, accessibility, funding, and digital literacy. And the venture capital community is really recognizing this diversity as well. They're investing in a broad array of ed tech categories, such as early childhood education, learning analytics, even back-end systems for school administration, language learning. They really recognize the diversity in digital learning. Now let's take a look at what this means for various stages of learning. In a K through 12 context, here are two interesting startups headquartered here in San Francisco. First is Class Dojo, that creates a communications platform for the entire school community to participate in. They're a Series C startup that's raised over $66 million so far, according to Crunchbase. And we also have Clever, which actually facilitates the learning process by helping teachers share and track assignments and provide additional digital tools and resources to students dive deeper into the lessons. They're a Series D startup that's raised over $43 million to date, again, as reported on Crunchbase. We're seeing big tech get involved as well. For example, a few years ago, Google announced that it would be committing via its Google.org Foundation to committing $1 billion over 5 years to enhance educational opportunities across the country. And this support goes beyond just cash grants. They're also providing access to their employee skills and certain tools to their partners in machine learning and artificial intelligence. Some of those partners are listed here. In terms of higher education, this segment of the educational system is probably better equipped technologically to handle this transition. Earlier, Cal State was the first and largest school system to announce that they were closing their campus to in-person instruction already for the fall semester. Now, this affects over 500,000 people across 23 campuses across California. And Harvard University just announced that only 40% of its undergraduates will be allowed on campus for the fall semester. Although most students can expect to spend some time at the university during the year, virtual learning will be heavily emphasized. Schools like this may be prepared from a learning perspective to handle a transition, but not necessarily as equipped for the business impact of remote learning. Some colleges and universities may find it difficult to make the finances work because of lost revenues from student housing, sporting events, books, merchandise, and other areas where they generate revenue. The concept of distance learning isn't anything new. It's been around for well over a century. Back in 1858, University of London was the first school to offer a remote, what they called external program degree. Now, this was done via correspondence, so you mail in your assignments. In 1922, we saw the first integration of technology in this process, the use of radio by Penn State University to facilitate remote learning. In 1989, University of Phoenix, which is represented in our panel later, private for-profit school launched its online degree program. And by 2018, 98% of public colleges and universities within the United States offered some form of online program. Getting a degree online is really easier than ever. Universities are partnering with technology providers such as Coursera and edX to provide the platform necessary to deliver educational content to their students. This is also illustrating a shift to a traditional B2B business model in education to more of a B2B2C business model. And then we're seeing innovation around education financing as well. So, for example, there's a company called Lambda School that offers 100% live and online curriculum over the course of 9 months. And it provides this for free to the students in exchange for what's called an income share agreement, where the student agrees to pay 17% of their salary back to the school for the following 2 years, up to a capped amount of $30,000 to cover the school's costs. But keep in mind, as of right now, this is not an accredited degree. It's more of a continuing learning degree. Additionally, there's a startup called Jolt that just raised a $14 million Series A, bringing their total funding to a little over $23 million to provide a pay-as-you-go education. The model here is you pay monthly. You can put the classes on hold, and they charge around $6,000 for what they're calling an NA-MBA, or not an MBA. Again, this is not an accredited degree, but they're CPD certified, which is continuing professional development certified. And they recruit instructors from Google, Netflix, and other well-known tech companies to teach their curriculum. Other challenges to the higher education business model include a freeze on study abroad programs. International students contribute about $41 billion to the US economy every year. That's attributed to 1.1 million international students that come into the US every year. Additionally, on the outbound side, there are students from the United States that visit other countries. Italy and China respectively host about 37,000, 12,000 students every single year. And it's becoming even more difficult to study in the United States. America's immigration agency just announced the withdrawal of student visas for courses that move entirely online. The affected students will lose their right of residence in the United States as part of this process, unfortunately. Despite all these dark clouds, we're seeing some interesting opportunities and partnerships emerging. For instance, Business Cider just reported, excuse me, that Holt International Business School is partnering up with EY to provide all of the company's 284,000 employees with the opportunity to get a remote MBA for free. Well, free to the employees, at least. And in addition, stay-at-home policies around the world has led to more free time for upskilling. So, for instance, Coursera has seen a 300% increase in enrollments. Udemy announced a 425% increase in enrollment. And LinkedIn Learning announced that in the first week of April alone, they delivered 1.7 million hours of content. And keep in mind that LinkedIn bought lynda.com for $1.5 billion back in 2015, an investment that's really paying off for them now. One of the key challenges is that instead of democratizing education, digital learning could actually be leading to a widening of inequality around the world. Although 99% of schools in the US report that they have broadband or fiber installed, only 65% of lower income US households with school-age children have broadband installed. So if students can't go to the schools, this will be disproportionately affecting lower income families compared to communities that have access to broadband and devices to learn from home. And Jan, the founder of the VC fund Emerge Education, which really focuses on investing in edtech startups, said that over 50% of the 1 billion global knowledge workers are projected to need upskilling or retraining to avoid being pushed into under or unemployment over the next 10 years. So this is a big challenge. Additionally, the pandemic's actually changing the way we think. So there's some physiological changes happening here as well. Research out of Harvard Medical School suggests that continuous exposure to stress and depression can actually increase the size of the amygdala, which is responsible for those core survival functions, and decrease the size of the prefrontal cortex, which is responsible for more executive functions. So it's changing our physiology here. In terms of mitigating this for your personal, so if there's a few things you want to take away to mitigate this physiological effect, the researchers recommend 4 things: creating a predictable routine, getting good sleep, staying organized, and having access to professional psychological help early in the process to try and mitigate these changes. So with that, I'd like to transition over to our Fireside Chat segment with our speakers. Now, I prepared some questions for our guests, and my colleague, Will Barkus, will be monitoring the audience questions and asking them as we go. So he'll just feed them into the Fireside Chat. We're not going to have a separate Q&A session. First, I'd like to welcome Raghu Krishnaiah, who's the Chief Operating Officer for University of Phoenix. He's responsible for revenue, compliance, student financing, regional teaching delivery, corporate and community college relationships, and student outcomes. He holds degrees from both MIT and the University of Pennsylvania's Wharton School of Business. Additionally, I'd like to welcome Stacy Wang, who just took on the role of CEO at the San Francisco Education Fund, where she's directing resources from the local community to give students, many of which are from underserved communities, the support they need to really succeed. Previously, Stacy was a partner at Transcend Education, where she shared best practices on innovation in the education industry. So we're extremely lucky to have both of these guests sharing their experiences in the education industry. Thank you very much for joining us today. So to get started, can you please tell us a little bit more about your organizations and some of the most critical ways that the COVID-19 pandemic has had an impact on your business? Raghu, why don't we get started with you and University of Phoenix?
Thanks, Darren. Good morning. Good morning to everybody. First of all, thank you, Darren, for inviting me to this conference. I'm very happy to be here. Excited to share what we're doing at the university. I thought I'd give you a little bit of background about the university for some of you who may not be as familiar with it. University of Phoenix, as you mentioned, was started about 40 years ago, and it was started right here in the Bay Area by a professor at San Jose State University called John Sperling. The university was always focused around how do you help working adults achieve their educational goals so they could pursue and continue on their career goals. And we built a model really specifically for them. And these are individuals who have some college degree, some college experience, but never had a chance to really finish a degree. And it's actually a growing part of the population today in the country. I think there's over 40 million people today that fit this area. Our students are incredibly diverse. Over 50% are minorities. or 15% are active duty military or veterans who we're very honored to serve. Over 60% are first time in their family to ever attend college, and about 70% or so have families. So a really unique set of individuals. And as you mentioned earlier, Darren, we have over 1 million alumni today in over 70 countries, most of which are in the US. And if you look at our LinkedIn, our alumni are working in nearly all of Fortune 500 companies, as well as in several branches of the military, school districts, hospitals, and government offices around the country. So they represent a very wide swath of the US population today. University has about 6,000 faculty members. We try to make sure our faculty members have relevant work experience, and we check that every year. And our average, our faculty have about 20 years of work experience, so they're able to bring that right into the classroom and make the learning that you do relevant in the workplace. We have over 100 degree and certificate programs in everything from technology, healthcare, business, education, and social services. Now, 95% of our students today are online, either fully online or also taking classes in some of our locations that we have around the country. So it's a nice broad swath of the population doing learning in many different ways and formats. You mentioned about the pandemic, and clearly, like every organization out there, the pandemic impacted us in ways we could never have anticipated beforehand. Today, we have effectively our entire workforce working from home, right? It's over 3,000 people working from home. Clearly, all our faculty, 6,000 plus faculty, are working from home as well. We had to close all of our campuses and service centers around the country, and they're all temporarily closed. And we felt that was the best thing to do because clearly we want to make sure students have the safety first in mind. So we created a model where they can still attend live in person, but do it from their homes. And this is a model that we think is actually quite effective. And we leverage all of our learnings from an online to be able to do this as well. And literally this whole thing happened in a weekend. So imagine trying to move all these people that quickly and all over the country within that. So it's quite an exciting time, to say the least. I think one of the things that the pandemic did, though, it really amplified for each of us who work at the universities why we're here and what we do. And that's really is to, if you talk to anyone at the university, the first thing they'll say is we're here to help others succeed. And so we really doubled down on that and said, what can we do to help in ways that we haven't thought of before to help others out there? And, it was incredible to see the amount of energy that was given to go make this happen and how quickly we're able to do things. Just a couple of quick examples. We rolled out a whole bunch of classes for teachers around the country, K-12, as well as higher ed, to help them learn how to teach online, because it is different than teaching in a face-to-face environment. We created a number of classes that we just began out for free to help people develop new skills. So as they were being displaced from one industry, they could learn how to transfer their existing skills, learn a few new skills, and actually work in other industries as well. And we created something called a virtual teaching academy, which we did working closely with a company called Blackboard, which is a learning management provider. And we had several thousand individuals come in there, and that teaching academy was run live. And we helped these teachers really, again, learn how to work in an online environment, not just use the tools, but also how to think about motivating and engaging with students who are working remotely versus writing in person. So a very, very exciting time, and I think a lot of great work that came out of it.
Thanks, Raghu. So Stacy, why don't you tell us a little bit about your organization? So this is your first day on your new job. Thank you for joining us on your first day. Could you tell us a little bit more about the SF Education Fund and your work there, and maybe a little bit about your background at Transcend Education as well?
Sure, excited to be here. So the San Francisco Education Fund has been around for over 50 years. It started when our founder was volunteering herself in a school and realized the power and the impact of bringing the community into schools to provide support for both teachers, who you guys all know public education is severely underfunded and teachers need a lot of support, as well as direct support for students in terms of providing access, social capital, and mentorship. And that has then continued on the past 50 years as a partnership with the School District of San Francisco, where the programs that we now offer include a range of literacy and math tutoring, which we have seen with the results of the kids that they actually grow and excel on standardized measures compared to the peers. And we provide volunteering, general volunteering for schools, about 300 to 500 volunteers every year to the 50 schools of San Francisco. We also provide direct teacher equity grants to support the teachers serving the most marginalized communities to have access to funding to innovate and try different things to best help their kids, as well as scholarships through the Mason Foundation to support college-going low-income families. So that's the range of work that the SF Ed Fund does. In terms of the pandemic and talking about Transcend and also my work in Oakland School District, it's been a crazy time, as most of the folks here and particularly the parents have experienced. So the schools have suddenly shut down, and that change for kids has been both traumatic and scary. And teachers are suddenly thrown into having to work in a remote and virtual way, more remote than virtual. I will say, to Raghu's point, that the training for teachers hasn't been to teach in a virtual manner. Suddenly you're trying to teach and do what we're doing right now, which is, we're presenting and talking, and teachers are trying to do that through video conferencing and other ways in a place that's actually not what they're trained to do. And how do you actually do engagement with kids in this way and check for understanding and things like that when there's only a one direction way of engagement, even through virtual platforms? So school has been severely disrupted, and nobody has a sense for what's going to happen this fall yet, because as we all know, with the pandemic, every week looks different. Things are looking better this week. Parents think they want to send their kids back to school. Next week, things are looking extra scary. Parents don't want to send any of their kids back to schools, and the different policy changes are changing as well. So in the midst of all of that, school districts are game planning with 5 different plans of, fully remote, partially open, fully open, other options, and trying to figure out how, with all these permutations, to prep teachers and schools to start back. So with nonprofits like mine, what we're trying to do is to figure out how to best support schools in all these scenarios. How do we think about bringing the entire community to help? You mentioned there's ed techs that have been helping, which have been great, and there's going to be more necessary to make sure that we have enough adults supporting the different kids in this multidimensional learning approach, as well as the other supports of PPE and things like that, to make sure that there's enough safety measures so that schools can actually open.
Thanks, Stacy. So you both mentioned, well, we've discussed how quickly this transition has happened within the educational systems. How has the transition affected your technology stack? And Raghu, you started to bring this up a little bit. I'm wondering what technological innovations the rapid pace of this transition has really forced the educational system to take. And have there been any implications in terms of security and cybersecurity and securing student data as things move from in-person to online? That might be more for school systems on Stacy's side of things. So
yeah, so I think we were probably in somewhat of a unique situation because we were mainly online anyway before this whole pandemic hit, and we already had a portion of our teams working remote, and they were quite comfortable with that. And if you look at the university, we built it from the ground up to work in an online and a virtual manner. So I think that's actually quite good. One of the changes we made a couple of years ago, we continue to evolve it, is we've moved a vast majority of our platforms to the cloud already. So it's highly scalable, it's highly secure, and we invest a lot in cybersecurity along the way. So I think one of the things we have done, which not so much is pandemic related, but we've done in general, because of sort of the way the needs of the students are right now and how they're changing, is we've invested a lot more in new artificial intelligence tools and data analytic tools. And the reason was that we want to make sure that really 2 things. One is that students can get to what they want to get to as quickly as possible and do it 24/7. They shouldn't be held up by our timelines when our people are awake. They should be able to go and learn whenever they need to at any point in time and get answers to their questions at any point in time. We find this to be incredibly important to help them to continue in their education studies and not take breaks or drop out, or as life, as anything else, life gets in the way all the time on a daily basis. So that's kind of one of the reasons we did it. The other reason is we have some very highly trained individuals who are very skilled and very good at knowing how to identify problems that students are facing and find very unique solutions to help them overcome those problems. And they do this every day, hours of a day. So we wanted to make sure they could spend as much time as possible doing that and not really have to deal with some of the administrative things that typically come up in helping students move forward. So I think the biggest change we made was really investments in these types of tools as a mechanism for us to continue to advance students' support and continue to ensure students are successful.
Thanks, Raghu. So Stacy, are you seeing similar transitions in primary and secondary school systems, for instance, moving to the cloud and allowing 24/7 access to curriculum and utilizing AI and advanced analytics,
Yeah, I think a little less of that at this point, but I would say, I think similar to where Raghu is probably talking about is like across both K-12 and higher ed, it depends on what your starting point was before the pandemic happened. For the schools that have been doing some kind of virtual, some kind of online component, for the schools that have, school districts that had one-on-one devices and a checkout to go home system and have been working locally with their internet providers to create the infrastructure so the whole community gets served. For those communities, the shift hasn't been that intense, given that they had the infrastructure, systems, and processes in place. For schools that didn't, there are districts across the country that had like a 3-to-1 or 5-to-1 in terms of people to device ratio and didn't have a home checkout policy. Those school systems are really struggling, given that they just don't have the devices, they don't have the systems in place. They're like renting hotspots like crazy to try to make sure kids have some access at home. It's just a huge breakdown and a loss of learning time for kids, given that that was not what the school system was designed to do in the first place. So there's a wide range of what's happening across education. And that also differs by age ranges. So, like Raghu was saying, a lot of the older kids, particularly in college, and you can imagine high school and middle school too, are able to more self-direct. They can go down a playlist of different curriculum options and figure out what they need to do and self-pace and set goals and things like that. But can you imagine a kindergartner who can't even type, trying to even log in to Google Chrome or anything like that? And it's impossible. So I used to work with Clever and different folks to try to figure out, are there ways to do like picture logins or QR code logins? What are the best apps for kids when they can't type? And what do you do when kids get stuck at home because they don't know what to do? They're like, there's no teacher to ask, the parents are busy, and they get stuck on something. Is there a list of other things that kindergartners should be doing, like reading or playing some other games, so that they can still continue learning until the teacher is available or the parents are available to support? So I think ultimately, while there's a lot of tech that's helping, the engagement piece is really hard, and the what do you do when the kids get stuck piece is really hard. We've always appreciated products like Google and things like that, where there's like ability to comment and share documents through the Google Suite, or there's ed techs like Seesaw, where kids can actually share their learning and make that transparent. You mentioned Class Dojo and some other ones as well. And those are really helpful to create some level of engagement and transparency, particularly between the adults at home and the adults in school, to do handoffs about how the kids are doing. So there's a lot of that happening. That's very supportive. The one other thing I would mention is related to Raghu's point about personalizing the options for kids. Some systems are doing this really well. So Summit Public Schools, a charter network that started out in the Bay, created a whole new grading policy for their kids once the pandemic hit. So you can either continue school as usual and go down your playlist of options and continue the current pace. You can accelerate and try to finish the school year faster. You can take a pass-fail if things are just crazy and you just need to do something. Like it won't count towards your college credit, but you complete the year. Or if there's something happening in your family, there's a COVID death, something's going on and you just can't do school, you can pause school completely. And having these variety of options for students and having mentorship to students to help coach them through what's right for them has been a way to also create flexibility of what school looks like, particularly for the younger kids who can't necessarily personalize their own education at this point.
And what do you see being done? So just to follow up on this, what do you see being done in school districts that don't necessarily have the financial resources? Talking about the broadening of the inequality gap. Are policymakers stepping in? How are things being funded? Is it more just cost effective to use technology, or how are they getting access to the internet or devices to be able to really keep up with the folks that do have access to this?
Yeah, I think it's requiring a lot of fundraising and folks stepping up to help. So, for example, Cleveland Unified is one of the biggest equity gaps in terms of access to internet. So they actually work with one of the nonprofits locally that focuses on getting internet access to every community, every home. They're trying to raise $36 million the next year or two to try to get everybody connected in their community, and that's a lot of fundraising to have to do to try to make that work. Along with a lot of partnerships with different internet providers to see what they can make happen. There's a lot of talk about trying to get the internet to be a utility, a public utility. That to your B2B2C comment, Darren, it's like, can the school district be the B2B with the internet service provider? And then the school district can then provide internet services to the community. And that allows then some barrier, particularly for the DACA kids and their families, immigrant families that may be undocumented, to not have to be sharing information they may not be comfortable sharing, but still be able to get access to internet so their kids can learn at home. So there's situations like that people are being really creative about that's happening, but it's hard. On the policy side, you had mentioned how schools are mostly networked at this point in the country, and Education Superhighway, a nonprofit in the Bay, has actually made that their goal to make sure every school is networked, and they partnered with the federal government to create an E-rate policy. And that basically was the funding that then allowed all of this to happen. So there's talk at the federal level around how might we repurpose E-rate or create something similar to get individual families connected so that this is possible. So that's going to require a huge policy shift and public funding. But there's a theme across all of this that without federal funding and policy in place to make this happen, parents are not going back to work anytime soon without their kids at home. So without that support and that level of funding in terms of millions and billions of dollars, this is going to take a really long time for things to ever feel like they're back to normal. And in the meantime, people are just trying to make things work with things like Austin sent out school buses with hotspots on them to try to go into communities that don't have them. So people are trying to be super creative, but it's very much a Band-Aid solution until we can fix the infrastructure necessary.
So on the topic of financing education, earlier I was talking about some of the new emerging business models like Lambda School and Jolt. Raghu, I'll punt this one over to you. Do you think, those new business models really have longevity? Do you see them getting traction, or are you seeing other non-traditional approaches to financing education emerging? Obviously, students in higher education are graduating with enormous amounts of debt. We know this. Online education is being seen as a much more cost-effective way to do this, but it's still very expensive. So is there anything you're seeing on the business model side or partnership side to help pay for education?
Yeah, actually, it's quite an energy behind this. To your point, the cost of education has been going up incredibly over the past 10 years. I think now, I recently saw a U.S. News study that said that the cost of the annual cost of public in-state colleges around the country now is about $10,000, right? If you're at public university, you take out-of-state, it's over twice that. And if you're private, it's about 3.5 times that. And that's just the cost of tuition. It's got clearly room and board and everything else kind of go on top of that. And this cost doesn't include, especially the publics, what all of us have to pay in taxes to help support it. Although it's a shrinking portion of the total budget of these schools, it's still a portion that's out there. And I think the challenge a lot of people this is why the debt levels are going up, is not only is the cost going up, but the average income of the individual families has gone up maybe only half at the rate at which the actual cost of tuition has gone up. So there's a big divide now, and costs are still being there. And yet, of course, we've seen all the data that shows that once you get this additional education, your chance of getting a higher paying job, a better career, more fulfilling, is this much higher as well. So there is the flip side of it. But clearly, we have to solve this cost problem because it is impacting not only the individuals but the country overall. People now are putting off raising families. They're putting off buying homes. They're putting off buying cars. And it is a problem that's gonna catch up to us very quickly and hurt us down the road. So I think there is definitely a lot of interest, and I'm actually very curious how these models that are coming out there are going to grow and evolve over time. I think they're definitely worth watching because there's a lot of conversation now about the return on the investments people are making. Am I going to get the job that I want after I finish all this education? Am I going to make the money I want? Am I going to be able to continue to move on and move up and do more interesting things over time? So I do think these models have some real legs to it. I think also though that organizations are also finding other solutions in place. Some purely market-driven solutions I think are coming up. I think a simple example from University of Phoenix perspective is why not just drop the price, right? Why keep the price high? And to your point, online education is a great mechanism to help us do that. The ability of the digital tools that are out there now and the way we can deliver online teaching, we can actually do a lot together. We can not only drop the cost of education, we can actually also help a lot more people at the same amount of time achieve the educational outcomes that they're trying to achieve. And we can do it much more quickly than we have before. So it really is, in many ways, a solution to many of the problems that are out there right now, and a way for us to actually solve it very quickly. So changing the price is clearly one way you could do that. And I think every organization should really look at how do I find a more cost-effective way to deliver and pass on those savings to the students that are out there. I think the other way is we are seeing a lot more of the sharing of the cost among many parties. So it's not just borne by the individuals, but it's borne by other groups as well. It's not just borne by the institution that's delivering the training. A couple examples: we work closely with organization I'm sure you've heard of called Manpower, right? They're a global staffing organization around the country. And we've developed a program with them where we will work with Manpower to help people develop a series of skills and then go place them in jobs, right? And so the cost to the employee or the individual is zero. There's zero effort on their part except in their time investment and their energy to go and learn these new skills. And employers are actually really loving this model, because now they're getting people who are more trained and who become more immediately productive on the job. And the individuals themselves are seeing the benefit of this because they're actually making more money right when they're starting their first job. So I think these type of partnerships that are coming up, where the sharing of the cost is split among different parties as opposed to just being borne by individuals, are out there. So like I said, I really think these are really good things to watch. I'd be curious to see if they can scale beyond what they do today, and if they will get further traction. But there's lots of other ways to help us solve this problem around the cost and the risk behind it.
Great, thanks. So Will, do we have anything coming in from the audience?
Yeah. Let me jump in. We have quite a few questions. A lot of them around equity and inclusion and some really interesting things. One maybe positive question or sort of twist is looking towards the future. Are there any paradigm shifts that are in terms of pedagogy, in terms of content, curriculum, et cetera, personalized learning, that you think are going to be beneficial? Are we going to have better educational experiences in this new digital world as well? And I'll open it for either of you.
Yeah, I can jump in. I am optimistic. I think there's a lot of opportunity here to really step back and think about what is the real purpose of learning and what are we trying to learn and teach kids. And when I think about that is, if we go back to what Raghu mentioned earlier, what do we mean by success in life? What does success look like? What are people trying to strive for? Is it happiness? What is it? And then backwards map that to then what should we be teaching kids in kindergarten and third grade and fifth grade? It actually creates a different conversation of, is what we're teaching right now, which is a lot of it is to prep for standardized testing, which has also been suspended. Is that the right thing? Or as parents who are on this, are watching this, you're engaging with your kids differently at home, and that's learning of its own. And does that actually build resiliency and grit and perseverance and joy? And how much does that matter for our children's future happiness and success? And how do we measure that and make sure that's part of learning? So it's a bigger conversation that's going to be happening in K-12, I hope, around redefining what success looks like and redefining what outcomes we're really trying to get to in learning for K-12. And if we're able to do that, then we can completely shift what the curriculum looks like, what learning opportunities look like, what we count as learning and not learning. And that would be really, really interesting to actually focus on things that we think will matter to build leaders and citizens of the future. To the point of community being part of this, I think it's going to really require a lot of folks to be part of reimagining what school is and what should schools do versus what should schools not do. So for example, right now, most districts' primary job is actually making sure kids are being fed. So I don't know if you guys know this, but with free reduced lunch populations and like Oakland and other urban areas, like 80–90% of their kids are free and reduced lunch. Before even learning happens, they need to make sure kids are getting food, thinking about Maslow's. So they're distributing hundreds of thousands, if not millions, of breakfasts and lunches and food to the kids and their families every day. And should that be the school's job? Do we want schools to focus on learning? And if we want them to focus on learning, how do we take things off their plate so that our teachers are not so overburdened that they can actually focus on teaching and learning for kids? So there's some interesting paradigm shifts in those senses that will happen, in addition to switching to more virtual, personalized, and remote options.
Raghu, I don't know if you want to jump in there, but I was going to ask maybe one follow-up question before I think we're running a little short on time. But just what can corporations, many of the audience here are sort of business leaders. How can corporations do more to help with workforce development, maybe even particularly toward disadvantaged communities or where we're going to see increasing gaps, perhaps in equity, as we talked about?
Yeah, I think corporations are doing a lot today, and they probably don't get enough credit for all of that they're doing around it, right? Particularly the large global corporations themselves are very involved in their communities and very involved with their own employees and the families of their employees, and trying to find ways to really solve the problems that we're seeing in the country today, whether it's increasing diversity or reducing inequity, or just helping people progress more quickly and develop a more fulfilling life for themselves. I think one of the things I am seeing that is really quite good is the way they're partnering more with all these different entities, the governments, with education institutions, with technology companies, to really come up with solutions, right? They're doing more than simply just saying, I'm just going to throw money at it. They're actually saying, how do I find ways to make it work? There's one example I can give you is I know we're doing it right now is we're working with a company called WazU, which is they work in a technology area, and what they've done is they've created an apprenticeship program for individuals who can come out of community college, get some development through an apprenticeship, and be in the technology field, and then be placed in a company, and then where they can continue on their education, and again, no cost to them. But these people are getting work-life experience on the job while they're also developing their educational credentials at the same time. So this is something that works very closely with the government and the programs the government has set up, with private corporations, with educational institutions, all kind of finding a way together to solve these particular needs. So I think as companies start moving forward, they're going to see more and more of this happen. I think one thing I would suggest that more companies do is to start thinking about training and education as one and the same and not distinct entities. Today, oftentimes, because of a variety of reasons, training is in one bucket in most of the budgets, and educational benefits are in another bucket, and they're managed by very different people. And at the end of the day, they're all trying to do the same thing, which is how do you help those employees in those companies really move forward more quickly, become more productive, and help the company adapt and change more rapidly to whatever's happening in their particular industry. So I think if they start thinking about these two buckets as one and the same, I think that's one big change that can go forward that will help.
Very cool. Thanks. And just to wrap up, so we're coming to the close of our Fireside Chat session. So to wrap up, if you could take 10 or 15 seconds to tell us about the one thing you think will change as a result of the COVID-19 pandemic that will really stick in education, what would that be? Well, we start with Stacy and then finish up with Raghu.
I would say the the equity gap in terms of access to learning is really being seen under a microscope at this point in time. And then because of that and the spotlight on that and the Black Lives Matter movement and everything that's going on right now, there's a real urgency to actually fix this, to really commit to not just placating or doing like a day of volunteering or giving some extra devices here and there, but really figure out like, what do we need to do so that these kids have equitable access to learning and they get the same opportunities as other kids. So I believe that right now the spotlight is on that. And I hope that we will come out of the pandemic with better learning opportunities for kids who usually get left behind and you don't see them because they're invisible.
Raghu, what do you think?
No, I think Stacy hit it right on the nail on the head. It's right. It is, the pandemic has exposed some really serious cracks in our educational infrastructure and exposed the weaknesses that we have. And I also am very hopeful that we are going to solve it. I think if I leave with one thing for everyone to consider is that I think the question of whether online and digital teaching can work or not, I think that question's been solved. We know we can do it. We know that it works. We know that it's effective. We just have to make sure we build it in the right way and we make it available for more people to be able to consume it in the right way.
So in conclusion, if I just summarize a couple points from this session, it would be education's real key component of getting our economy back on track, both in terms of allowing parents to return to work, as well as preparing the workforce for challenges all of our business face in this next normal phase. Secondly, digital learning is more than a simple substitution of in-person teaching techniques. We could really leverage advanced technologies and data analytics, AI, to really enhance and enrich the learning experience with more adaptable and personalized experience for better outcomes. There's also an opportunity to teach the teachers, both in terms of technology and process in this new normal. Also, it's very beneficial to provide students with 24-hour access to education, and just flexibility is becoming very important. And then in terms of financing models, there are evolving financing models in the space, and we'll keep an eye on that. And hopefully this will raise the attention of the inequality within the education system, so more attention will be placed on making sure certain communities aren't left behind in terms of education. So I'd like to end by mentioning X-Force, which is Orange Silicon Valley's corporate co-innovation program. If you're interested in the trends of Silicon Valley, or interested in partnering or investing in startups, we'd really like you to be part of the program. Please feel free to reach out to us to learn more. You can reach out to my colleague David Martin or Ellen Crown. And with that, I'd really, really like to thank our guest speakers, Raghu and Stacy. We really, really appreciate your time and bringing your experience to this conversation. So with that, thank you all for your time as well in watching this webinar, and farewell. We'll see you soon.
Thank you.
Thank you.